Around 2,000 years before the events of Attack on Titan, a young slave girl named Ymir stumbled upon a massive tree while fleeing for her life. Inside that tree, she encountered a spine-like creature known as the source of all living matter, transforming her into the very first Titan. This single moment changed history forever, leading to the rise of the Eldian Empire, centuries of war, and ultimately every event in the series. But what if Ymir had never found that tree? What if she had died in that forest as just another nameless slave? The Canonical Hunt. The story of Ymir begins with tragedy. Her village was raided by the Eldian tribe led by King Fritz approximately 2,000 years ago. The Eldians were a small, warmongering tribe who massacred villagers and enslaved survivors. Like all captured slaves, Ymir had her tongue cut out to prevent rebellion. One day, while tending pigs, Ymir freed them out of sympathy. When King Fritz discovered this, he gathered all slaves and demanded to know who was responsible, threatening to gouge out everyone's eyes. The other slaves pointed at Ymir. As punishment, Fritz declared she would be hunted like an animal by his men and their dogs. Wounded and terrified, Ymir ran through the forest. She eventually came upon a massive tree with a hollow opening at its base. Seeking shelter, she entered and fell into a pool of water beneath it. There, she made contact with a spine-like creature that ancient texts would later call the source of all living matter. This organism bonded with Ymir, transforming her into a massive Titan. When she emerged in her Titan form, King Fritz saw an opportunity for power and decided to pardon her, forcing her to serve him. A slave's death in the forest. In this alternate timeline where Ymir never discovers the tree, her fate would be far simpler and more tragic. Wounded and exhausted, she would be caught by Fritz's hunting party and killed without mercy. Her body would be left in the forest like countless other victims of Eldian cruelty, just another name lost to history, another life extinguished by the brutality of that era. Without Ymir, King Fritz would remain the leader of a small, insignificant tribe. The Eldians would continue their raids and conflicts with neighboring groups, but would possess no supernatural advantage. They would be just one more tribe struggling for survival. Fritz himself would eventually die, his legacy forgotten. The mysterious source of all living matter would remain undiscovered beneath that tree. Without Ymir's transformation, there would be no Titans, no Eldian Empire, and the entire history of the Attack on Titan world would be completely different. The world without Titans. The most immediate and obvious change in this timeline is that Titans would never exist. The 9 Titans that defined so much of the conflict in Attack on Titan would never be created, because there would be no Ymir to die and have her power split among her 3 daughters, Maria, Rose, and Sina. The Founding Titan, Attack Titan, Colossal Titan, Armored Titan, Female Titan, Beast Titan, Jaw Titan, Cart Titan, and Warhammer Titan would all be absent from history. Without the power of the Titans, the world would develop along completely different lines. Military technology would advance naturally without the need to counter Titan abilities. Nations would rise and fall based on conventional warfare, economic strength, and diplomatic skill, rather than possession of Titan powers. The entire concept of subjects of Ymir would not exist, because there would be no Ymir to pass down her unique biology to descendants. The Eldian tribe would likely be conquered or absorbed by larger, more powerful nations. Without Titan powers to level the playing field, they would have no way to compete with established kingdoms and empires. The name Eldia might survive as a historical footnote about a minor tribe that existed 2,000 years ago, but there would be no Eldian empire stretching across continents. The nation of Marley, which suffered immensely under Eldian rule in the canonical timeline, would follow its own historical path. Marley might become a dominant power through natural development, or it might be conquered by other nations. Without the trauma of Titangent-enabled oppression, Marleyan culture and national identity would develop very differently. There would be no generational hatred of Eldians passed down through centuries, no propaganda portraying them as devils, and no internment zones forcing people to wear armbands marking them as second-class citizens. The deep-seated prejudice that defined relations between these peoples for nearly 2 millennia would simply not exist. No paths, no coordinate. One of the most fundamental elements of Attack on Titan's mythology would simply not exist. The paths are invisible channels connecting all subjects of Ymir across time and space, allowing transmission of memories, Titan powers, and commands from the founding Titan. These paths converge at the coordinate, a dimension where Ymir's consciousness resided after death. In canon, when Ymir died 13 years after gaining her powers, her consciousness traveled to this realm, where the coordinate manifested as a massive tree of light. There, she spent 2,000 years as a slave, even in death, molding titans out of sand whenever a subject of Ymir called upon titan powers. Without Ymir gaining titan powers, this entire supernatural framework would never exist. There would be no coordinate, no paths dimension, no way to transmit memories across generations. The world would operate purely on natural laws. This has enormous implications. Aaron Kruger would never mysteriously speak of Mikasa and Armin before they were born. Eren Yeager would never access future memories through his attack titan. Zeke's consciousness would not survive near-fatal injuries by being rebuilt in the paths dimension. The entire mechanism driving the story's time loops and predetermined events would be absent. Before we continue exploring this timeline, make sure to subscribe if you're finding value in this analysis. The great nations rise differently. Without the Eldian Empire dominating the world for nearly 2 millennia, other nations would flourish. In canon, Eldia conquered countless civilizations, forcing them to assimilate or face extermination. The Marleyan city of Lago was destroyed in a single day. The devastation of Monte and ravaging of Valle killed hundreds of thousands. Entire cultures were wiped from existence. In this alternate timeline, those cities and peoples would survive and thrive. Cultures, languages, and traditions wiped out by Eldian expansion would continue developing. The world map would look completely different, with nations rising and falling through conventional warfare, economic strength, and diplomacy, rather than titan powers. Trade routes would form naturally. Alliances would be built on mutual benefit rather than fear of titan attacks. Technology might actually advance faster. In canon, titan powers gave Eldia such a massive military advantage that it slowed overall innovation. Why develop better weapons when titans could simply flatten any opposition? Without titans to counter, military technology would evolve naturally through competition between conventional armies. This arms race would drive innovation in ways the Titangent-dominated world never experienced. Nations like Hizuru, which allied with Eldia and possessed advanced technology, might become dominant global powers, freed from the Empire's shadow. A completely different geopolitical landscape would emerge based on resources, geography, and human innovation rather than supernatural abilities. No walls on Paradise Island. One of the most iconic elements of Attack on Titan is the 3 massive walls, Wall Maria, Wall Rose, and Wall Sina. These walls, named after Ymir Fritz's 3 daughters, were constructed by King Karl Fritz, using the founding titan to turn thousands of subjects of Ymir into colossal titans. In this alternate timeline, none of this would happen. Paradise Island would remain undeveloped, possibly inhabited by indigenous peoples or colonized by whatever nations became dominant. There would be no traumatic memory erasure, no artificial mystery about the outside world, and no population living in ignorance behind walls. The main characters would not exist as we know them. Eren Yeager, Mikasa Ackerman, and Armin Arlert would never be born because their families would follow completely different paths. The Survey Corps, Military Police, and Garrison Regiment would not exist because there would be no walls to defend and no titans to fight. The entire premise of the series would not occur. There would be no colossal titan breaking through Wall Maria, no tragic loss of Eren's mother, no desperate mission to reclaim territory, and no shocking revelations about the world beyond the walls. The absence of the curse of Ymir. In canon, all inheritors of the 9 titans are affected by the curse of Ymir. After receiving one of the 9 titans, that person will die exactly 13 years later, regardless of their health or any medical intervention. This curse exists because Ymir Fritz herself lived for only 13 years after gaining her powers before dying to protect King Fritz from an assassin's spear. Her death created a template that all future titan shifters would be forced to follow, a biological countdown that could not be stopped or reversed. The curse shaped the entire system of titan inheritance. Because titan shifters would inevitably die after 13 years, powers needed to be passed on before the holder's time ran out. This created urgent pressure on titan shifters to find worthy successors and pass on their abilities through consumption. If a titan shifter died without being consumed, their power would randomly transfer to a newborn subject of Ymir somewhere in the world. This unpredictability made careful succession planning essential for nations relying on titan powers. Without titans existing, there would be no curse of Ymir. People would live natural lifespans determined by health, environment, and circumstances rather than an arbitrary 13-year limit imposed by ancient mythology. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how different the world would be without the 13-year curse hanging over every titan shifter. No Great Titan War. The Great Titan War was a devastating civil conflict within the Eldian Empire, occurring approximately 100 years before the main story. After running out of external enemies, the 8 noble families holding Titan powers grew resentful and turned on each other in a struggle for dominance. When Karl Fritz became the 145th king, he was disgusted by his ancestors' crimes and believed the empire deserved to fall. He conspired with the Tiber family to orchestrate its destruction. They fabricated a Marleyan hero named Helos and manipulated the noble families into destroying each other. In the chaos, Marley seized 7 of the 9 Titans, while Karl Fritz fled to Paradise Island with the founding Titan. In this alternate timeline, there would be no Great Titan War because there would be no Titan powers. The Eldian tribe would never have grown into an empire. The concept of a hero Helos would have no meaning because there would be no Eldian oppression to rebel against. The butterfly effect on individuals. Every single character in Attack on Titan owes their existence to a chain of events that began with Ymir entering that tree 2,000 years ago. Remove that single moment, and the ripples spread across centuries, erasing entire family lines, and reshaping every aspect of the world as we know it. The Ackerman family would never develop their unique abilities. In canon, the Ackermans were a byproduct of Titan science experiments, giving them enhanced physical capabilities. Notably, Ackermans are not subjects of Ymir and cannot be affected by the founding Titan's memory manipulation, making them immune to the very paths network that would never exist in this timeline. Mikasa's incredible strength and Levi's status as humanity's strongest soldier all stem from this bloodline. Without Titan powers to experiment with, the Ackermans would be ordinary. The royal families would follow different paths. The Reese family, secret rulers of Paradis who held the founding Titan for generations, would be nothing special without this power. Historia Rice would never be born, or would be born as a normal person, without any claim to royalty or supernatural authority. The warriors from Marley would never be trained to inherit Titan powers and infiltrate Paradis. Their families would not be trapped in internment zones. Reiner's psychological trauma from living a double life would never occur. Annie would not be crystallized. Bertolt would not be eaten by Armin. Even characters who never held Titan powers would be affected. Sasha Blouse would not die from a bullet wound during a raid on Marley, because that raid would never happen. Connie Springer's village would never be transformed into Titans, and his mother would not suffer that horrible fate. The philosophical implications. Attack on Titan explores profound themes about freedom, destiny, the cycle of hatred, and the cost of vengeance. Many of these themes are tied to Titans and the history Ymir set in motion. Without that history, would humanity avoid these problems, or would they manifest differently? The cycle of hatred between Eldians and Marleyans would not exist in this specific form. However, human nature would still create conflicts. Different nations would find reasons to hate and fight each other based on resources, ideology, religion, or ethnic differences. The lesson that violence begets violence would still be learned through different historical examples. The question of freedom that obsesses Eren Yeager would take different forms. Without walls literally imprisoning humanity and Titans literally eating people, the metaphorical cages trapping human beings would still exist. Economic inequality, political oppression, and social hierarchies would still restrict freedom. The theme of children inheriting the sins of their parents would persist. Even without literal inheritance of Titan powers and memories, each generation would still inherit the consequences of their ancestors' choices through wars, political systems, and cultural prejudices. If Ymir Fritz had never gone into that tree, the world of Attack on Titan would be unrecognizable. There would be no Titans, no Eldian Empire, no walls on Paradis Island, and none of the characters we know would exist. But this does not necessarily mean the world would be better. While the specific horrors of Titangent-powered warfare would be absent, human nature would still generate conflict, suffering, and injustice. Different empires would rise and fall, different peoples would be oppressed, the faces and names would change, but many fundamental problems would remain because they are inherent to human civilization. The canonical timeline serves an important narrative purpose. It takes universal human problems like prejudice, the cycle of revenge, and the loss of freedom, and gives them concrete form through the mythology of Titans. The supernatural elements make these themes more visible and dramatic, but they reflect real patterns in human behavior. The story of Ymir Fritz is ultimately about how one moment can change everything. Her decision to hide in that tree rather than accepting death set in motion a chain of events that lasted 2,000 years. It demonstrates how individual choices, especially when amplified by power, ripple through history in ways the original actors could never predict. Both timelines offer something worth considering. The canonical timeline shows us the terrible cost of power and the difficulty of breaking cycles of hatred. This alternate timeline reminds us that while specific historical tragedies might be avoided, the underlying human tendencies that create conflict persist across different circumstances. The choice between these timelines is about recognizing that major historical events often hinge on seemingly small moments, and that the problems we face as a species transcend any particular configuration of history. Whether Titans exist or not, humanity still struggles with fundamental questions about freedom, justice, and how to break cycles of violence that span generations. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.